We have 3 panelists today, and we're going to switch things around. But first, I'll start by introducing them. Immediately to my left, we have Dr. Erica Ross. She earned her PhD in neurobiology of disease at Mayo. She helped to propel Cala Health toward their current status of industry darling. And she continues to pursue her passion for innovation in her current role as Director of Applied Research at Abbott Neuromodulation. Fun fact about Erica, she loves the mitochondria.
It's true.
It's true.
It's true.
Okay.
And then we have Brian Pepin. He studied electrical and neural engineering at UW and at Cal. He's a serial entrepreneur who spent several years at GSK and Galvani before launching Rune Labs, where he successfully raised one of the industry's bigger Series A rounds that Jim alluded to this morning. Brian is also my personal savior at cat babysitting. Pierre is joining us online. Hello, Pierre. Hopefully you're there and technically connected. And I'm just going to call you Pierre because I'm never going to be able to say your name well. But you can unmute yourself and do that if you'd like.
Pierre is completely fine. Please never call me by my name, family name. I mean, way too complicated.
Okay, so Pierre's the CEO and co-founder of New Aurora in Calgary. Calgary being the thieves of the Atlanta Flames, but I do still continue to hold that grudge many decades later. Pierre received his PhD from the University of Calgary and spent some time in B school preparing for his entrepreneurial career in neurotechnology. He's joining us remotely today, but next time I assure you, when I see him in person, I will collect some personal fun facts to share with you next time. Our topic today is sensing and the future and the new advances in diagnostics and analytics. And our panel was in communication over the last couple days and weeks, and we decided that this group had a lot of insights to offer that we could best sort of draw out through conversation. So rather than scripted presentations, I put out a challenge to the group saying that I would buy a scotch for the person with the fewest slides. So I owe 3 scotches to 3 people with no slides. So I encourage everyone to take this opportunity while I let them do their own professional introductions to come up with some challenging questions. And after the intros, we'll jump in. So Erica?
Yeah, I mean, introduced me well, and mitochondria is my favorite thing to talk about over a beer. So I'm the Director of Applied Research. I head up research strategy, kind of trying to figure out where we're going to go in the research and development pipeline at Abbott Neuromodulation. Before this, I was in various roles, a couple different hats at Cala Health up until 2019 when I joined Abbott. And before that was an assistant professor at the Mayo Clinic where I was doing a bunch of DARPA work under the Targeted Neuroplasticity Training Program. That's it.
That's good. Do I need to speak into this or near this? Or sound okay?
You're good.
Sounds good.
Can you hear me, Pierre?
Yeah, very well.
My name is Brian. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Rune Labs. We're a software and data platform company that focuses on enabling precision care in neurology, which is where we intersect with the neurotech world. So we, through partnerships with device companies and with hospitals, we ingest a lot of what I call clinical brain data. So things like electrophysiology, brain imaging, and then it's really, really interesting neuromodulation device data. And bring that into clinical care along with patient-reported data from our mobile app and an Apple Watch integration, as well as things that are scored and tested in the clinic. And we bring that into a really nice dashboard for clinicians that kind of pattern matches, especially kind of within patient stuff right now, and supports them and their patients in kind of finding the best kind of possible mix of available interventions right now in Parkinson's, which is where we're most active, and we're building up small cord and MS now too. We just announced, around this kind of real world care in Parkinson's, we just announced a deal with Medtronic that specifically focuses on expanding that to folks that are using their new Percept brain sensing implant and brings that brain sensing data also into the clinician portal So we're pretty excited about that. Yeah, and then we also work with this data with both med device and pharma companies to make it useful for developing the next generation of therapies as well. So ranging from kind of decision support tools to new algorithms for neuromodulation to how this kind of really privileged longitudinal continuous and brain sensing data or neurotech data can teach us something about how to develop new disease modifying therapies in the pharma world as well. So things like patient segmentation or pulling out disease progression signals in the presence of like highly varying clinical symptoms. That's what we do.
All right, Pierre, you're up.
Awesome. Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Pierre. Fun facts, I'll give you one. Every time I go to Starbucks coffee and they ask me what's your name and I say Pierre, they always ask, oh, Jeff, right? Somehow every time I give my name, it is Jeff. To the point that every time I go to Starbucks, ask my name, I say Jeff now. It's just much easier for me. Anyway, what do we do at Neura? We are all about sensing and mapping. We basically come and provide sensors that offer a much higher resolution of brain data. Those data can be used for epilepsy monitoring and intracranial monitoring, but we're also working with clinical research organization because the data we collect are so sensitive that we detect a bunch of biomarkers that are relevant for epilepsy, but also Parkinson's disease and other conditions. We basically come upstream, like early, we want to make Brian's life easier. And so if we can provide him with data that are much more accurate and that can help him do a much better at analytics, it's a win-win for everyone. Down the line, our vision is really to inform how we can do better neuromodulation, so better placements of electrodes for both recording and stimulations and increase the efficacy rate of such devices. But we are also in discussion with a few partners when it comes to therapeutic approach and medication. So how can we personalize treatments for drugs and in combination with devices? We, as I mentioned, I think released just a white paper that is accessible to our website right now. So I really encourage you to get it and provide insights. It's our first white paper. We have another one coming up in the pipelines on Parkinson's disease, and we would love to get the community involved with what we're doing.
Great. Thank you. So I think we'll start with, I'll start off with a question and then Loden can help monitor on Zoom, and then we have live questions from the audience. But one thing we talked about earlier today has been a lot of focus on closed loop technologies, and that's the new little black dress of our field. That's everybody's got to have one for every occasion. And the first step in closing the loop is obviously going to be the sensing and the collecting of data, but that seems to be sort of taken for granted at this point. Sensing seems to, in some ways, be a simple part of the equation. What's the next step? What's the next improvement to sensing for each of you?
Well, I'm not sure it is being taken for granted necessarily, at least, not in our kind of partnerships and the clinicians we work with. I think people are, for the most part, pretty humbled that this is the first time that we've seen, in the case of DBS brain sensing, for example, that amount of data from that amount of patients, for a long time. So we've seen, I think the most brain sensing data that's been available today in that context has been from our kind of collaborators at UCSF, and that's maybe 10 patients followed for a year-ish on the order. And so now, with this example of this, this Medtronic cohort, that's 1,000 patients per year. So you're going to see a lot more heterogeneity in the disease. You're going to see, in our case, that match with a lot more kind of in-clinic data and combination data. And yeah, I mean, we're in the early days of figuring out what it means, how to figure out what patients are good candidates for, which versions of adaptive therapy, if indeed. Maybe it's just a matter of using that data to optimize their therapy with their medications or something like that. There's a lot of maybe even lower hanging fruit I think to be gained there as we start to see sensing data at a reasonable scale and out there in the real world as well, where it's not kind of testing necessarily like a scientific hypothesis, but You're just looking at the effects of individual interventions and did it change something about the signal or not. So, you know, when I moved this person from normal levodopa to a controlled dose Rytary, did I see the expected change in their brain signals and their Apple Watch data and everything else or not? And then you can, you know, start to do why, and everything looks like, you know, 1,000 N of 1 experiments now, and you can learn a lot, I think, from that.
Yeah, I think to build on that, I think we're now in a phase in this field where we're moving away from the technology, talking about it as separate data streams, and now thinking about this, it really with the patient being the focus, and really developing patient-centric therapies at that N of 1 scale. So I think we're really at the point where we can, instead of talking about big data and just generating data for the sake of data, address true unmet patient needs with these different data streams, and understand what are the wins that we can actually we can have in this field to use the data to improve our therapies and to have truly personalized therapies from it. In the way that technology has evolved for computation, one for having the amount of data that we're now able to store across different widgets that we're able to pull from, and then tie that to what the patient's perception is about how their therapy is working. We're really at that point where we can have truly patient-centric therapies.
Great. How about you, Jeff?
I do agree completely with the personalization aspect of such therapies. Taking in our case where we study a lot of epilepsy, the detection of interictal events, or events that happen between the seizures, if you were able to measure those more precision, you could definitely be able to prevent seizures before they, become full blown out seizures. And those will only be something we can do with much more sensitive aspects, with much better sensors. Now, within those clean data that it is possible to now collect more and more, there's all these spectrums around biomarkers and high frequency oscillation, et cetera. And I think what we can also see is kind of like cluster or subpopulation within a certain disease. We always talk about the spectrum in autism. Well, there's most likely a spectrum as well in epilepsy, and a spectrum in Parkinson's disease and movement disorders, and et cetera. And I think being able to differentiate what is a pathological compared to a healthy biomarkers will provide us with much more insight regarding what type of personalization approach we want to have with patients. Now, of course, that comes with the issue of figuring out how do we measure outcomes? How do we measure outcomes all the time? How do we do it reliably? So we don't drop data in the middle. And that's why, when Brian mentions, for example, some of the work they're doing with, I believe, Apple Watches as well, this is like amazing tools we can use as well on the side to probably figure out how we can communicate or interact with our patients over time and keep measuring those data.
So I think my fundamental question is, how much data is too much data? Are we going to get to a point where all of this information that's being collected and cross-referenced between watches and wearables or implanted sensors or sensors anywhere in the stream, how are we going to start to discern what's noise and what's value? And what if we're wrong and we have to go backwards? And
I think we're going to need to make sure that we're asking very targeted questions of the data, and that we are curating it in a way that it is actionable at the end of the day. I mean, my data scientists, if I ask them if there's such thing as too much data, they laugh in my face. We have this conversation regularly, but I think that as long as we're really at the point now where we can actually do that. We can ask the question of the data and understand. Also, on the flip side, I mean, we're talking about sensing, but we can't dissociate all of the new waveforms that are on the market and coming onto the market in the future, and how we really customize and personalize therapies that, with knowing that we'll have different kinds of therapy to deliver within these systems. So we're really getting sophisticated in how we can truly personalize it.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it a little bit is, the data is directly coming from patients and sort of indirectly coming from clinicians and hospitals. And there's a non-zero burden to get that data, whether it's thinking about the consent processes or PRO stuff, patient-reported outcome stuff you're asking them to do, even just asking somebody to wear a watch consistently and interact with it, motivating the radiology clinic to put your HTTPS address in there so that you get the images. There has to be some, in order to do that at any reasonable scale, there has to be some motivation that that data is going to be actionable basically today. Like there's going to be, it might not be the most actionable data in the world, it might not be actionable for every single patient, but there has to be some promise that presented, collected in context, there's some opportunity for having something that's actionable around with the available set of interventions, you know, changing around medication, neuromodulation parameters, even like sleep and diet stuff. There's something you can do. Otherwise, it's really hard to get patients to engage over many, many visits over time, and it's hard to get enough clinicians motivated to do it. So, so we don't ingest, you know, a lot of fMRI data, for example, because that's not something that's generated clinically at any kind of routine basis for PD. You know, I mean, that could change. But like I said, right now, that kind of line for us of like what's enough, what's too much, we focus on things that we can ingest that are sort of being generated sort of anyway today, more or less, that have a reason to be generated and that we think can be clinically actionable today.
Anything to add to that, Pierre?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think every time I think about what is too much data, I always think about what is too much for a clinician. And I always have this example of one of our epileptologists we work with that, it has an entire lab that does data analytics, and some of the specific biomarkers that he's looking into in epilepsy, it takes him about 8 hours to analyze a segment of 5 minutes. And because he's really looking at something specific that he believes can help the patients. And so I think too much, it's not only what we can compute in our high-end labs or what we can do in terms of like cloud computing, et cetera, but it's also what is the system capable of handling today in terms of, what resources available in hospitals today that can allow them to compute maybe some of the data and be directly relevant to patients. So to me, I always look at it from the eyes of the clinicians and the system as a whole. I just think it's going to take, we all know how slowly hospitals change their equipment and how things are quite conservative in the field sometimes. And I just think the system is going to still evolve slowly, and we need to adapt and grow or help grow that system so we don't, no one is missing the train in the middle.
I'll say there is a level of conservatism in clinical practice, but I've been pretty pleased with and if you just, we're asking folks to come in and bring data into their neurology practice in a way that they haven't traditionally done, and there's an enthusiasm about it, and the transition happens pretty quick once you show here are some use cases that are that are actionable, basically. Because I think at heart, everybody, it's hard to find a neurologist that isn't frustrated with the ability with at least some of their patients to get them to optimal care. So if you can cross that threshold, then people will make some changes even to their kind of their routine. But
and I think it's up to us to kind of figure out how we take those insights and we display it in a way that is actionable by anyone who's actually
good design.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are complicated data sets, and we're going to have to get to a point where a rep in the pain space can articulate why this therapy is better than this therapy for this person, and so on and so forth. So these large data streams have to be distilled to a 5-second action. I can make a decision based off of this information now, which is no small feat.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's tiers of it. So I think the within patient stuff happens first. So looking into say, okay, within this person, how are their changes in therapy correlating with changes in sleep, with changes in reported symptoms, with measured tremor scores, things like that. And fortunately, machine learning is really, really good at looking at data and servicing those patterns. And with the ability to collect data continuously within a patient, you collect a lot of data per patient, so you can find those within patient patterns. Relatively lower bar than the next step, which is finding the across patient patterns where you need maybe, because of the heterogeneity of the disease, you need more folks and things like that. But that, it doesn't have to necessarily go right to that. Like you can, I think, bootstrap with the within patient stuff and then kind of go into the more across patient stuff.
Len, do we have any? Okay, no questions from Zoom. Is there anybody here who has a question that they'd like to put out? Otherwise, I'll keep going. Dr. Cornwell.
I have a question. It seems to me that, so Eric's comment, I think, about displaying information in an actionable way for physicians is really good. And it also seems that, we're talking about AI and integrating things, and there may not be a real obvious one-to-one correlation between like a decision support system that a clinician sees and the behavioral data that was collected down the road. And I wonder, it seems to me that there may be an opening for ethical concerns in a decision support system that's recommending therapies to physicians based on behaviors that aren't directly correlated. Like you're not seeing the one-to-one correlation between the decision support recommendation and the behavior that generated that recommendation. And a physician that's not seeing that correlation may just go with that recommendation, and it opens the door, maybe, to an ethical conflict of interest, because the people who are generating the decision support tool are not, immune to that financially.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we stop well short of being a decision support tool. So again, it's about just servicing patterns in the data so that they're visible. I think a common refrain when I talk to neurologists is that they are essentially treating the symptoms in front of them, quite literally, and that's what they're limited to doing. And so I think the first challenge is to take the available data, when we focus on 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after a clinical visit, and present that in a way where, okay, you don't just have to treat the symptoms in front of you. You can actually treat this view of the patient 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after a visit. It's still very much up to them what clinical decision they want to make, and they pull it out. But it's presenting that complete picture of the whole patient, or a more whole patient, as a baseline for making those decisions, and as a baseline for further conversations with the patient too. So you can focus in on, it looks like you're consistently having dyskinesia, and we see like elevated beta in the morning. Can we have a conversation? How are you maybe unintentionally overdosing your L-dopa in the morning? Maybe we can work on that. So I think that's the level at which the entry point for this is, for me at least.
I think another piece you kind of brought up there, Andy, I think regulators have been extremely adapted very well to the way that this field is moving, and are eager to see, I think, more digital tools that ultimately improve therapies for folks. But regulators and payers are really digging the fact that we're seeing so much wealthy data out there now, to really help us objectively understand how therapies are working, and for each individual, and improve what's being delivered to patients. So that's been really, I think, refreshing to see that, how receptive they've been to this field evolving the way it has.
Well, yeah, and in oncology, I mean, the companion diagnostic space is getting still not super mature, but it's getting more mature. And you have companies like Guardant, which have pretty large scale companion diagnostics. And that seems to be perceived as a win-win kind of for everybody, because patients are getting only the kind of care that's actually going to make a difference for them. Payers are only paying for the care that's making a difference. And also, just kind of the general sort of targeting becomes more clear on how you do that. So, I mean, I don't know where the exact line is between decision support and companion diagnostic, but there's at least like a path forward on companion diagnostics that seems to be on the oncology side working for folks, basically.
Yeah, I think just to add on this as well,
Right, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to add, like, I do see the ethical components, and I do believe that we over time will work with regulations to make sure that it's done properly, as Erika mentioned. But I agree with the other panelists as well. Every time we talk to doctors, they're like craving for more data, because we have clinicians today that are just facing patients, and they are at the front line, and they have seen very little innovation for many years, and they're dying to get more options in their hands to treat their patients tomorrow. And when we tell them about, the ability for remote monitoring, etc., and the ability to collect more data and provide better insight, and indeed the ability to visualize those data better is key. They are always pumped about it. It provides more confidence into the treatments they can provide to their patients. And this feeling of confidence that they know finally a bit more what they are doing with the patient is key. And I think beyond that, it is also bringing a kind of like uniformization of the standard of brain care. If you look at neurologists or neurosurgeons across the US, they will be doing things slightly differently between places. And they do that based on their own experience, but also where they've been trained. And I think this also provides us with the opportunity to create some uniformity around treatments, and also providing, by doing correlation with outcomes, you can really drive the standard of brain care forward and make things a bit more uniform for the benefits of the patients.
Did you have a follow-on, Andy?
One thing I might address some kind of Andy's question is I think it does have to be done in a way that's very open. Like, it cannot be a closed system where folks can kind of peer into it and see how the recommendations are being made. Like, it should be from the regulator perspective, certainly, but also I think from the patient and clinician perspective, like, pretty transparent about how like A is leading to B. It's not like a black magic box that's saying like, oh, you're a candidate for this therapy now. It's like, okay, like we can kind of see how.
But it does seem like these multidimensional brain data especially open themselves up to sort of black box AI solutions.
Well,
that's, I don't know. That seems scarier to me.
Yeah, but again, like if you look at kind of how these things have proceeded in the oncology space, I think ML kind of finds the patterns. Then you have scientists that go back and say, okay, well, here's the pattern. How do we interpret that from a clinical, from a in this case, neuroscience viewpoint? And until it's interpreted in that way, it doesn't really become, a companion diagnostic, or the regulators basically won't allow it, and clinicians won't trust it, it seems like, either.
So that brings us to who owns the data.
Patients own the data.
Patients own the data. Next question.
Okay, we're done.
That's not a Zuckerberg answer.
I'll just say one interesting topic on this, since we're discussing neuroethics anyway, and it's something that we think about. So it does seem to be the case that like there's a growing sort of legal consensus that patients own their data, which is, I think, probably where it needs to end up. But then you do end up with these situations, and some of this might be like a cultural shift that just needs to happen, where clinicians have traditionally been in control of the data for one reason or another, and they're used to being able to provide this type of data to their patients with a lot of context, a lot of clinical context around it. And so I think there's some, evolution where we're getting into some situations where you could say, okay, the patient's on their data, so they can request to see something back. And this happened to 23andMe, kind of, right? Where it's like, okay, well, you get this data back with no context, and now like, okay, I'm at risk of, and this is 23andMe as example, I'm at risk of cancer. What do I do? Do I get a double mastectomy? And you have to make some like really serious decisions that kind of reach into the area of, danger, basically. And so you don't want to be necessarily providing stuff back to patients with no context, obviously, even if, by the letter of the law, like, okay. So you have to, I think this is why, so for us, our kind of solution to this is to really focus things into the patient-clinician conversation, so that there always is a clinician there to provide that context. But yeah, so if you just say, okay, patient owns the data, that's great, but then you still have to think about how you're getting the data to that patient in a responsible way.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, this is a problem for me. I go and I get my checkup, I get my blood drawn, I get the panels back, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
And the doctor says, no, you're perfectly normal. Said no one ever about me. But what does it mean? Okay, the patient owns the data, so they get to see it.
Yeah.
Are you committing to purging their information if they request that you do that?
Yeah, and you have to in Europe, for sure. And even under HIPAA, there's a lot of regulations around it. So, I think it probably works slightly different with everybody, but basically, when patients are using our stuff, they go through a HIPAA consent agreement that gets re-updated periodically, so they reconsent. And so they, it's plain English, they can see what they're saying, and they can choose not to do it. you know.
Yeah, and the only way we maintain the momentum that we have now is if we do this the right way, and we are extremely transparent about what's being done with folks' data and make sure they understand that they do own the data. We're using it to hopefully improve therapies in the future, but if we lose that trust, then there's nothing here for us to do.
I mean, some of this is a lot easier than it used to be because like Congress has actually passed laws that require the EHR companies to integrate. And so like you can have folks that are on the Apple system right now go in and depending on which EHR they're in, they can request and Apple will go grab their EHR data and load it into HealthKit. And then those folks can share snippets of that data with the, you know, diabetes company that they're working with or the heart health company that they're working with, you know, make that a lot easier. I mean, most of the issues I see are not because patients don't own their data. It's because, well, not because patients own their data. It's because, practically speaking, they don't. Right? There's a lot of stuff that's still hidden inside the hospital system and things like that. That I think a lot of times for good reason, like people feel weird about giving them patients access to, but then, I don't know, at a certain point, you're not trusting people with their own care, but and that seems to be kind of where we're at right now, is that level of balance.
And I think as we go forward, in order to, I mean, Fitbit's an interesting one, right? Where you had, after a year or so, these widgets end up in a drawer. So if we don't do this in a way where everybody understands the value that they're getting from providing data to their providers and to folks who are looking at the data to understand how to continue to improve and how to predict and how to deliver better therapies. If they don't see those actual insights coming back to them, they won't use it. It's just a very well-known piece of this. Implanted therapies are a different story, but there's a lot that it will be very important for us to continue to have patient perception as part of how we create these models and continue to improve the therapies. So there will be a level of engagement, and with that comes understanding how we provide value back to them.
Okay. Jim, I think we have some, you have some
question.
Yes, please.
But I'm going to go on them. I want to follow up on the general topic here about who owns the data. 5 years ago, we had as our keynote speaker here Frank Fisher, who was the CEO of at the time of NeuroPace. We think of NeuroPace as a neurostimulation company, and they are, but they're really also a data collection company, right? And Frank mentioned at the time during his talk that they had assembled, and again, this was 5 years ago, so it may not be true today, but at that time, he said they had assembled more brain data than anyone else. In fact, Jojo, you probably recall that Dan Rizzuto a couple of years ago when he was here said, oh no, we've assembled a massive amounts of data and we're going to make it available to anyone who wants. And so we had this discussion 5 years ago as to who owns the data. This is before it became, cool and profitable to talk about, data analysis. But where I'm going with my question, I'm sorry for rambling, where I'm going with my question is, going back 5 years, going back 10 years, going back 15 years, before industry and investors understood the relevance and the value of brain data or just neurological data to begin with, there were companies who were in the business of collecting brain data in the form of EEGs. Now, most of those companies ended up under the umbrella of Natus Medical, who to this day, right, is the largest player in the traditional neural sensing or neurodiagnostics market. But what I'm wondering, number one, did they miss the boat? Number two, are opportunities to interact or collaborate with some of the, not just Natus, but some of the other vendors of EEG systems, MEG systems, the amount of data in an MEG, just enormous amounts, and it's really meaningful data. Many of those companies went out of business because it was hard to sell you know, a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 piece of equipment. So I guess my question is, it's really a legacy question. Is there value historically in some of that legacy equipment, or those legacy companies in terms of, hey, what have you collected over the years? Or is the value just moving forward? Are we starting in a whole new universe, or is there relevance to some of the, I don't mean dinosaurs, I mean some of the predecessors in the neurosensing business?
I can jump on that one. You know, like not all data are equal, right? Like you have good data and you have some not as good data. It's a bit like the oil sand in Alberta and the clean oil somewhere more south. The idea is, I think you can get a lot of data and say you collect the best data, or like, sorry, the largest repository of data. And we are personally working with EEG companies that does a lot of scalp monitoring, because we believe in the correlation that we can do between intracranial and scalp monitoring at the same time. And so that's the way to extract value out of the data, but it needs to be clean data to start with. And I will always question, and I don't have access to this large repository of EEG data, but what is the actual value of what they have? I do think there is value somewhere, but we as things still have a lot of work to do in understanding how we analyze such large amounts. I think it's also a question of how do you collect those data and what are the different protocols in which is being collected. It's great to say that we collect data across different centers, etc., but if they change the way they collect it, can you actually compare apples to apples? And that becomes a second challenge as well. I do think that, you know, I think that no one has really, or I don't think like we have missed the boat, or those people have missed the boat. I think we are just still trying to figure out how we can analyze such a large amount of data and make sense out of it. And there are so many layers that are that need to be revealed that is just taking us a lot of time. I do think that data collection aspect will continue more and more. I do think that one of the things that is, you know, as we talked just before about the ethical aspect of collecting data and who owns the data, there's a lot of people that of course also ask, how do we monetize those data? Where do we go with that? And, you know, it's all these questions are still, I think, you know, kind of a melting pot. And it's about trying to figure out how we make the system move forward, transferring them. I don't think I don't have a clear answer for that, for your question. I just think we are still trying to figure it out. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what's missing in a lot of these kind of older retrospective data sets is some picture of kind of following along with the interventions that were staged or the interrogation of the system. So I did start my life as an electrical engineer, right? So it's a highly simplified, but you have a black box and you're trying to understand what's in the black box, and you just look at what comes out of one end. There's only really so much you can learn about that system versus interrogating it and saying, okay, I'm going to put in a specific response and then understand what happens in that specific response in context with noise and everything else. And I think that's the difference between, you know, what us and some other folks are doing today, where you're really capturing all of the different, not only just outputs, but like inputs into the system to understand that kind of transfer function element of it, versus just saying, okay, we're going to look at this kind of closed system for, you know, however long, and then try to say something about it. I think also, I mean, in the case of I think neuropace and MEG, epilepsy is just kind of a tough market as well. Like, most people with epilepsy are relatively well treated by drugs, and for the folks that aren't, you know, it's kind of a small number left over. I mean, it's really good that these therapies are available, but if the only thing you can do with an MEG is target surgical resection for like a fairly small number of folks, it's going to be hard to build a super big business around that. So you know, that's on the academics, I think, to find better kind of use cases for these things, so that the markets can be bigger.
I think we have a Zoom question.
Yeah, but
I think these guys articulated it pretty well.
I can read her mind. I already knew that.
Okay, Stefano, do you want to ask a question? You can unmute yourself if so.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So there's, the question is in sensing modalities, and if there's anything that you see as, a big gap there, anything missing from a technology perspective that you consider would be, really enabling, and any thoughts on how to close that gap, if anything at all, that you'd like to see, again, for your own benefit, or the patients, companies out there.
I would love to see a rechargeable commercial brain sensing DBS device. That would be awesome.
I thought we were looking to the future here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the digital health field, that phrase is kind of overused now, I think, in general, but there's a lot of data streams that you can pull from. I think we've got the right tools. It's just a matter of asking the right questions and making sure that the data sets are well curated and quality data streams, and that you understand what patient perception is relative to the information that you're gathering over time. But I think we've got a lot of tools. I mean, we have studies going on all over the place with different kinds of widgets, that you can get some really nice data from what's on market already to question those things.
Hey, you actually said two things that I think is where we fall into a gray area. You said well correlated and quality data. Those are subjective terms. What one person considers to be well curated, is there a standard? Is there a widely recognized
yes and no
way of collecting and sorting and aggregating data?
Yep, yes and no. I think that the data science world continues to evolve in how we standardize what is a well-curated space. I think what kills us is if we are chasing spurious data and we think that we have something that's actionable because it's actually not a very high-quality data set. So there are a lot of efforts for folks in this space to make sure that it says it's a clean data set, that you understand what is truly the information you're trying to gather, what is not. I'll give an example from the work that my team did when I was at CALA. Wearable device stimulation recording hand tremor, and people are very creative in what kind of activity they do when they're wearing a widget. We had some really interesting data that came through with when we're trying to record hand tremor, and so you start to understand, well, what am I expecting that data stream to look like if this person is doing forward posture right now? Not that. So I can throw that data out. That's not my job. That's somebody doing the YMCA dance. So we kind of have to figure out how to make sure that you have that quality data to then make decisions and help improve the therapies in the long run. If you're in bad shape.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously like qualitative terms, but there are ways to kind of score these and quantify them in terms of the time it takes for a clinician to look at it before they say, okay, I basically understand what's going on here, and then get into the conversation. The number of times that somebody looks at like a chart or a dashboard and is able to make a actual intervention. You say, yes, they made this one intervention. They did that, and then they saw before and after. Versus, they look at it, they don't do anything. And those are the things that we try to focus on.
We have just under 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists, what are you most, you can pick one, what are you most excited about, and what are you most afraid of in the area of sensing and data?
I am most excited about our ability to eventually have all of this happening in a single system, constantly adapting to a very large data set that is truly personalized to really deliver truly personalized therapies. I am nervous about some of the considerations in cybersecurity. And I think, I mean, we have an extremely strong cybersecurity team, but we're Abbott, and there's a lot of people in this space who are not the gigantic company that we are at Abbott with a whole team of people focused on that. So there are ways for this to be done not well, and there are ways for this to be done well. And so I just hope that as a field, we make sure those standards exist across the board and do it the right way.
Yeah, I mean, so in oncology, over the last 15 years, as these more data-driven therapies and therapeutic workflows have kind of come into practice, you've seen mortality rates come down 2% a year. It's cumulatively a lot. And that's what I'm most excited about, is better outcomes for folks. And hopefully the appearance of some actual disease-modifying therapies for the neurodegenerative disorders that we work on, or some of the psychiatric disorders that other folks are working on, would be great. You know, I think the thing that maybe I've worried about or really interested to see how it plays out is kind of what we were getting at earlier, which is there's going to be certainly in neurology, probably in psychiatry, like a needed kind of cultural shift that accommodates the presence of this data, that accommodates patients having some access to it, figuring out how to contextualize that. Technology can happen very fast, but cultural shifts don't happen as fast. So I think it all has to be negotiated. I think it's stuff that can be negotiated, as oncology has shown. You know, it might take a decade, like it took in oncology, but you know, I think that's one area that we're paying very close attention to for sure.
Here.
Yeah, on my side, I'm very excited to see a day where we kind of maybe have even what I would call like an implantation clinic, a place where you have to personalize so much the type of devices that you want to build to treat different type of conditions, but then also to monitor health all the time, and maybe make that routine measuring devices where you can sense maybe things more accurately. You know, people are trying to do that already with subdural devices, things that are just supposed to score the skin. There's different approaches right now, and I do believe that it's going to become easier and easier, the same way that heart pacemakers have evolved. And now those type of surgery are very, very common, and patients don't stay much time in a hospital after that. What I'm mostly afraid about, and we have talked about it, is the ethical aspect. I'm afraid that there's going to be I'm afraid that maybe we don't own all this, the responsibility enough, and we need to do a better work maybe at communicating with the population in general about the work that we are doing. Because I think my biggest fear is that there is some bad publicity about neural implant. And I mean, just look at COVID and last year and how many people thought that vaccination will mean that they get a chip in their body, right? And it's so easy for maybe people to pick on those topics that I don't want the industry to step back 10 years and have to restart a bunch of activities to make sure that we can treat the thousands of patients that I need, or millions of patients. That's my biggest fear.
Thank you. Thank you all for no slides Monday.
Thank you very much.